That's only funny because he just kissed my girlfriend on stage.
You guys want to do some whippets? Asked Brian as if it were as normal as offering a glass of water. I was 17, out with my friend Patricia, who I secretly wanted to be more than just friends with, and the two of us had ended up at her friend Brian's apartment where he and some other guys were glued to a PlayStation. Brian was much older than us, but Patricia said that she knew him pretty well and that if we went over to his place, he'd have weed for us to smoke. I had recently started smoking weed, so this sounded cool to me. But after a hearty round of bong rips, he offered up the whippets, which I was not at all familiar with. Patricia emphatically accepted, and Brian walked us over to his kitchen counter where he picked up a deflated balloon and a single small silver cylinder from a box next to it. In one quick fluid motion, he inserted the cylinder into a plastic piece on the end of the balloon, clicked it into place, and turned it, causing the balloon to inflate to the size of his head. It takes me back. Hang on. He pulled the silver cylinder out and tossed it into the sink where it clinked against several other empties. He then placed the balloon to his mouth and emptied it into his lungs. His eyes rolled back and he swayed slowly before placing a hand on the counter to steady himself. A few seconds later, Brian's wits appeared to be slightly returning as his eyes returned to his sockets, and he went into a full-on giggle fit. The empty balloon still hung limply from his hand, and Patricia snatched it away to fill again for her own turn. She mimicked Brian's technique, and a moment later, another empty cylinder clinked in the sink. Patricia inhaled the contents of the balloon, and the smaller it got, the larger her eyes grew. The empty balloon fell from her hands, and she pitched forward into my arms. I steadied her and held on until I could feel that she had her balance back. When I let her go, she leaned against the counter and started laughing hysterically. Brian's laughter died down first, and he bent over to scoop the balloon off the ground and proceeded to load it up again. Once the balloon was full, he extended his arm to hand it to me. Patricia's laughter calmed some, but still continued softly in the background. I slowly brought the balloon to my lips, emptied my lungs of air, and breathed in deep. A tremendous pressure filled my head. My vision faded to black, and stars exploded across my brain, severing ties to all of my senses at once. I would say I felt completely detached, but that would be a lie, since I felt absolutely nothing. I figured I was dead or close to it, until the blackness began to break apart, and somewhere far off in the distance, I could hear Brian and Patricia's laughter once again. I also heard a third person laughing with them, like a deranged mental patient. And it took me half a minute to realize that this laughter was my own. The pressure slowly lifted, and I didn't know much in that moment, but what I did know was that I felt outstanding and I cared about nothing. I wondered if this was how nihilists came up with their, is it nihilist or nihilist? Nihilists came up with their life philosophy. I pictured a group of apathetic, gender-neutral people sitting in a dark, smoky room, sucking mystery gas from balloons, while the floor filled up with empty silver cartridges. Of course, I attributed these thoughts to my current compromised mind state. At some point, Brian suggested we get food, and before I knew it, we were in his car headed to a nearby IHOP. Suddenly, I found myself at a table with Patricia, Brian, and 4 of his friends from the apartment. Conscious awareness was slowly returning, and while I wasn't back fully, I was coherent enough to study a pancake menu and place an order. Everyone at the table talked casually and laughed at anecdotes they shared, while I stared off into space, just not caring. Brian was talking to Patricia in a garbled foreign tongue, and she laughed at everything he said, and I figured they were fucking, or had fucked. And a graphic image of this flashed across my mind's eye. I tried to replace Brian with myself in this brief fantasy, but it was gone too quickly. I examined Brian's actual face now, and for the first time realized that his left eye was lazy and there was hair growing out of his ears. White crust was caked in the corners of his mouth, and pieces fell away like snowflakes every time he laughed at one of his own jokes. Ugh. His mouth crust caught me in its fascinatingly disgusting tractor beams, and I simply couldn't look away. The longer I stared, the drier my own mouth became, as if the two things were relative to each other somehow. I closed my eyes and wondered how much longer it would be until this feeling passed. That was when I felt myself being wrapped in a cool wetness that started from my head, worked down my back and chest, and then spread to my nether regions and beyond. For just a moment, it was the most refreshing feeling I had ever experienced, and even though this cool wetness wasn't going into my mouth, my pores were soaking it in to deliver hydration to my depleted system. While taking in the discovery of my newly found power of liquid extraction, I suddenly became aware that every person at the table was staring. They had ceased their individual conversations as all eyes, including Brian's lazy one, were on me. Patricia's face bore a look of concern, while smirks passed back and forth between the others. Suddenly a voice pierced my veil of cloudy inebriation, drawing me back across the border of consciousness. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," said the voice just before a flat circular object crashed to the table in front of me. Directly following the disc were several glass cylinders that exploded in front of me like crystal fireworks. The liquid cool sensation I was enjoying became overwhelming and exponentially less enjoyable when I realized this feeling was a direct result of our waitress dropping a tray of 7 waters onto my head. Due to my compromised state of mind, I was confused about my situation and immediately thought it was I who had done something wrong. "Oh no, I said, jumping to my feet. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." "Oh no, I'm the one who's sorry, Shug," said the waitress, looking confused and mortified. Brian and his friends could no longer hold back and laughed as if it were going to be the last chance they ever had to do it. Even Patricia was laughing hard and placed her hand on Brian's shoulder with a familiarity I wasn't too keen on. I had no idea what to do, so I did the only thing I could. I started laughing too. I mean, I didn't get to see the tray of drinks fall on my head, but I imagine it must have been pretty hilarious. Soon after I joined the Chuckle Fest, the distraught-looking waitress's face softened and a tiny smile broke through the concern. A moment later, she let out a high-pitched giggle that grew and added to the swell of laughter already around her. As the laughter subsided, she picked up her tray, gathered the empty glasses that hadn't broken, and promised she'd be right back with more water and to clean up the mess. We continued to chuckle as each of Brian's friends decided they needed to reenact what my face looked like. Over and over again. I was less than thrilled with their interpretations of the incident, but laughed along, hoping the conversation would transition into another topic. It didn't. When the checks came, I was actually surprised to learn the waitress had comped my short stack and side of bacon. You're right, it gets you. She comped my short stack and side of bacon, although I guess I shouldn't have been I was actually surprised to learn the waitress had comped my short stack and side of bacon, although I guess I shouldn't have been, considering what happened. Brian and his friend thought the entire table's meal should also have been comped, and they grumbled their dissatisfaction amongst each other. Patricia also enjoyed a free meal, as I saw Brian take her check with his when he went to the front to pay. On the drive back to Brian's, the fuzziness in my brain had mostly dissipated, and I became increasingly aware of how wet and uncomfortable I was. When we got out of the car, I announced I was going to leave, and Patricia told me that she was going to hang out for a little while longer and get a ride home from Brian. I imagined that ride wouldn't come until the next morning. I drove home, mostly moist, from head to toe, but otherwise I was full and satisfied. Most people will tell you doing whippets is dangerous and one of the worst things you can do. But I didn't think it was all that bad. After all, if it weren't for whippets, I wouldn't have gotten free pancakes, and that's something everyone can appreciate.